We are very, very blessed to have today someone who is trained and certified in EMDR and is going to educate us on the process and specifically how EMDR can be used to help survivors of brain injury. So give me a brain injury. Welcome to Patricia TORRES from EMDR Empowered. Yeah.
Hi guys, good morning, good afternoon. How are we all doing today?
Good.
Good. Awesome. So what exactly is it, right? What is EMDR? Well, EMDR is an acronym that really just stands for eye movement, desensitization. So eye movement is one of the bilateral stimulations, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Desensitization, so meaning like reducing that emotional charge that one feels towards an event, and then reprocessing it, meaning kind of we'll talk a little bit about later about neuroplasticity, about the brain's ability to be able to kind of rewire, kind of be able to reframe and change how it was working before in a more adaptive manner. Real quick side note. So how this was founded was actually there was a psychologist by the name of Francine Shapiro who recently got diagnosed with cancer. She was really distressed and she was walking down like in the garden of the hospital, I think, and her eyes spontaneously began to move right to left and left to right. And she noticed that after this happened, she started to feel less distress. And so from there, she began, some research and found that the brain has this natural ability to be able to work through difficult situations and make meaning out of it, right? Learn from it, grow from it. And so, with that, the bilateral stimulation, such as eye movements, can also be done through auditory, meaning like, for example, some of you had headphones, you'll hear a sound from right to left to right, or we might do a tapping, and we're actually going to do an exercise at the end today so you guys can learn some of that. If we were in the office, we would use these what are called tappers, and then they would vibrate in your hand. Just because too, in terms of modifications to the approach, and we'll talk more in depth later about perhaps, working with a neurologist. Thank you, Violet. Awesome. So glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Great job. Great, Violet. Yeah. So depending on maybe the severity of the injury, we may not want to use eye movements. We may want to use tapping, or maybe auditory might be overstimulating too, but sometimes we can also use it depending, right, on case-to-case basis. And in terms of the brain being able to heal itself, right, like the body does, and I'm going to kind of like underline or repeat this over and over again, this is kind of the mechanism at which it's proposed, is that, right, if we go through as survivors of brain injuries, what if the thing that is a solution that fixes our problems is a thing with a problem, right? So how is this going to help me if that's what's happening for me? We'll talk more about that as well. In terms of how do we know it works, right? What about the proposed mechanism? So if you think about bilateral stimulation, eye movements, I don't know if you can see my eyes moving right to left to right. It's kind of similar to what we found in deep sleep. So REM sleep, we all aware of that? Rapid eye movements, sleep. Yeah, our eyes kind of move left to right to left. This is known to have to do with memory consolidation. So for example, if we go through something during the day, we go to sleep, we kind of process through it, and then in the morning we feel better. You ever hear that kind of term, I'm just going to sleep on it, right? I'll feel better. So normally this is kind of what our brains are supposed to do. However, of course, just talking about sleep, does anybody have any difficulties with sleep, or can we all sleep like little babies? No, right? All of us are like, no, not over here. It takes me too long to sleep. Or if I do fall asleep, I keep waking up, right? So imagine, guys, if when you're sleeping and you're supposed to get into REM sleep and you're supposed to, this process in your brain is supposed to help you work through stressors. What happens if you don't get good sleep, right? So it's almost like it gets backed up. The issue that happened that day, you didn't get good sleep. Now it's carrying with you to the next day. Maybe the same thing happens the next day. Same thing, difficulty sleeping. And all of a sudden throughout the week, now you kind of are carrying like this backpack or bucket full of stressors that the brain was not able to process as it should have, right? So EMDR therapy almost kind of like gets this system, this process rebooted, restarts it, so that the brain can end up working through it and you can make meaning, just kind of Violet was saying and sharing her experience. Before we move on to the next slide, just wanting to note that, you know, I've specialized in EMDR therapy for most of my career. The reason why I love it so much is because I got it done myself. And it is way different than any other type of treatment you have ever been through. And the reason why I say that, I think, is just because, you know, how we talk about maybe in therapy is like, okay, you know, say those positive affirmations, or, you know, I know I'm a good person, or I know I'm good enough. Maybe we know that up here, but it's another thing to feel it, like, I am enough, I am a good person, right? So EMDR therapy helps with that. And I've seen it in all of my clients. And, you know, I'm really hoping that you guys get to experience that as well. Okay, sweet.
I want to know if you receive insurance.
Yes. Yes. So certain clinicians will accept certain insurances. Raphael, good question. So is there a particular insurance that would work best for you?
Would like to see that.
Insurance. Just let her speak.
I want to know if my wife knows the insurance.
Dad,
if you
let
guys
her speak.
affected.
Let her speak.
Yeah.
I'm listening to the meeting anyway, so let her speak.
She listened to the meeting, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Raphael. And the packet handout that I sent in the chat has a list on page 2 of clinicians and what assurances they accept. Right. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And Raphael, there's going to be a Q&A at the end. And so maybe if some of you are okay with sharing what your insurance is, and I can write that down. If there are any insurances that I didn't put on the list, I can get that for you.
Okay. My wife, I think she got a call.
I know. Just let her speak.
She got a call, you know?
Listen.
Kaiser, got it. Thank you, Raphael. Yes, I will definitely get that down for you. I'll make a list right now. Perfect. Yes. Feel free, throw it in the chat, or we can talk about it in a Q&A. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you,
yeah. All right, guys. Okay. So who is it for? As you can see, this kind of laundry list, we've got performance anxiety, sleep problems. We just talked about sleep, right? Everybody. Trauma. We're going to talk about trauma in a moment. Low self-esteem. Addiction. Some that might look like alcohol, drug use, gambling, sex, porn, shopping, all kinds, right? Trust issues. Maybe we've also, you know, because of some of our experiences that we've had, we have difficulty trusting people. Yeah. Trusting the world. Phobias, maybe fear of flying, fear of public speaking, heights, anger. How many of us are angry or can get real angry? Like, don't try me, right? I'm getting angry. Especially maybe it's hard to kind of regulate ourselves.
No, I don't get angry.
Yeah, me too.
Megan and Leo did fantastic at, right, with their successes, right? Controlling anger.
Awesome. That's great. Great job. Great job. Yeah. Yeah. So do we have a hand up or?
Answers and
Yeah.
Okay.
What's the best way to regulate anger? If you have no.
That's a good question, guys. Fabulous question. What's the best way to regulate anger?
Yes.
I mean, in terms of, you know, I think about anger, you know, just we want to identify, you know, some of those cues when we are becoming angry, right? So that we can kind of know when it's coming. But in terms of EMDR therapy, you and your clinician can A, help you with stress reduction, reducing stress so you're less prone to get angry. And then B, we can work on whatever it is that's causing you to get angry so that...
Well, it's not, I don't outwardly get angry. I've never been angry outwardly at anybody.
Sure.
I mean, unless somebody steps in front of my kid or something, one of my kids or something like that, I might be like, whoa, back off, bud. But I mean, I have a really hard time forgiving myself.
That's a good point that you bring up, right? Sometimes if we have difficulties like forgiving, mostly it's us. Yeah.
Oh God,
right?
I cannot let go that the fact that I drank myself I drank enough to where I was falling and ended up with a brain injury from hitting my head. I mean, I can't even grasp it. I'm just, my life is nothing close to what it ever has been.
I see.
My memory was my strongest thing about everything about me was my memory was the best thing about me, and it's gone.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So it's like everything I relied on the most, my whole persona has been stripped away from me, which is like an oxymoron, How do you manage a 6-story commercial building in Santa Barbara, California on the prime corridor of State Street and not have to like search for cell phone numbers of 70% of your tenants in your cell phone? You just don't.
Right. Yeah. That sounds really difficult, Gus. I'm sorry to hear that. But you know what? Honestly, I think this therapy is going to be really beneficial if you're interested, and we can get you connected to help you with some of that anger and difficulty forgiving yourself, and perhaps what the incident that led to the injury. So
Patricia, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question to ask you. In your pedagogical training, what made your EMDR different from typical counseling or psychological training?
Carol, you're like a mind reader. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Ta-da! Awesome. So maybe is it okay if we kind of scoot into and answer your question, Carol? So how EMDR therapy is different is that it really gets to the root of the issue. So as opposed to spending so much time in therapy, just talking about it, it's faster. It gets straight to the problem of the matter. You don't have to talk in detail, right, about the issues. There's no homework involved. And again, it allows the brain to do what it was supposed to do all along. So we restart the mechanism in your brain that allows you to be able to work through difficulties and stressors and events that you experienced in your past or are experiencing.
No, I wasn't asking what differentiates this therapy. I was asking what your training makes be different. That's what I was asking, specifically about your pedagogical training to be an EMDR therapist.
I see. So in training, I'm a licensed marriage family therapist. So you can get additional trainings to become an EMDR clinician, and you have to get that training after the fact. You go to grad school and your master's and stuff. Is that answering your question?
Not really, but that's okay. I'll listen further.
Okay, Carol.
I'll talk to you some other time. I'm more interested. Okay, go ahead.
It's okay, Carol. I will write your name down, and if need be, we can kind of we can talk offline. How's that?
Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Okay. All right, so next slide. So how does EMDR therapy affect the brain? So like I mentioned before, the brain wants to recover from events and experiences that happen. And something gets malfunctioned. Something, we go through overwhelming situations and then we're not able to work through them and get past them like we're normally supposed to. Okay, so when I mentioned earlier, though, how does this specifically going to help me if my brain, the thing that's supposed to help me recover from these traumatic memories, is not functioning as it was before because as a result of my injury? And so I want to let you know and hopefully provide hope and security, knowing that there are components of EMDR therapy that we can use to help you be able to strengthen those parts of your brain, or at least the events and memories that can help you believe more positively about yourself and the experience. And we'll talk more about that more in depth. But On the right-hand side, you can see that there's a SPECT scan image of what the brain looks like pre and post EMDR therapy. On the left-hand side, you see where the red, it's kind of like highlighted. That's supposed to kind of represent like emotional energy, emotional activity, kind of like, maybe anxiety, like freaking out, hyperarousal, maybe anger, fear, those kinds of things. And so this is from Amen's. I think Amen Clinics kind of presented to you guys in the past. They found through SPECT scans that EMDR therapy reduced that emotional energy. As you can see on the right-hand side of that image, there's less red, only after 4 90-minute EMDR sessions. So again, going back to how it's more provides, symptom remission more quickly. There is evidence to prove that actually in a SPECT scan. And then again, Daniel is going to talk a little bit more about that connection in just a moment. Okay, go ahead. Great. So we're going to see a little video that's going to talk about, at least introduce what happens in the brain during when we get stressed out. And then I'll go into more detail about actual examples that might resonate with you. Okay. Thank you.
Let's take a brief look at what happens when we experience trauma. Our brains have a natural way to recover from traumatic memories and events. This process involves communication between the amygdala, the alarm system for stressful events, the hippocampus, which assists with learning, including memories about safety and danger, and the prefrontal cortex, which controls behavior and emotion. While many times traumatic experiences can be managed and resolved spontaneously, some experiences may not be processed without help. Stress responses are part of our natural fight, flight, or freeze instincts. When distress from a disturbing event remains, the upsetting images, thoughts, and emotions may create feelings of being overwhelmed, of being back in that moment, or of being frozen in time. EMDR therapy helps the brain process these memories and allows normal healing to resume. The experience is still remembered, but the fight, flight, or freeze response from the original event is resolved.
Okay, thank you for showing that video. I think it just has a great depiction of what kind of happens in terms of how our brain responds to traumatic events. But let's even just go even further and talk about what exactly is trauma. Before I start talking about this, I just want to mention a caveat. Talking about trauma can be triggering for some of us, especially if some of the examples that I'm going to discuss is something that you've experienced before. So we are going to do a little short kind of box breathing and go over that, and after we'll talk about trauma, just to help us kind of regulate, right? Regulate any emotions in case stuff comes up for us. All right, so trauma is actually subjective. Trauma is not defined by how big something is, the magnitude of an event. More so, trauma is defined by how we respond to it, how our bodies respond to it, how we encode it in our system, in our nervous system. For example, one person can go through something and not feel anything towards it, and another person can go through the exact same event, and now this can be become what I'm going to mention in a moment, an emotional splinter, something that gets stuck that we need to take out. So before I became more trauma informed and got all of my training and consultations to become an approved consultant, my idea of trauma was like, okay, it's this big thing, maybe witnessing somebody getting killed. Maybe it was because it had to do with a veteran. Maybe it had to do with a car being in a really horrible car accident. So that's kind of what constitutes big T trauma. It's like this one event that occurred in your life that, more had to do with like an accident or witnessing some type of violence. But what we found more so, what's most prevalent in all of our experiences are what we call small T traumas. Earlier, before we started the presentation, some of you had mentioned that some of the stressors were managing money, job loss, having to deal with cops, domestic violence, some agoraphobia, having to leave the house, right? Perhaps maybe for some of you, there were friends or family invalidating or not believing you, not, really validating your experience. Maybe some of you had difficulty communicating or verbalizing, finding the words to express yourself to get help. Maybe some of the providers weren't really understanding you, or you couldn't find the right person to help you. Again, job difficulties, not remembering things. Maybe it's taking longer for you guys to get things done. Maybe getting reprimanded for it or losing a job. And what results from these events could perhaps kind of lead us to feel negatively and believe negatively about ourselves. Maybe there's some embarrassment there. Maybe there's some shame. Maybe there's anger towards ourselves, right? So as a result of certain things, and I'm going to go into more depth, it really just permeates our experience. And this is what we call trauma. And so if you think about it, we all have trauma. I have never met a person, nor have I talked to anybody that's ever met a person that hasn't had some type of small t trauma. So next slide, please. All right. So theme, here's the theme again, right? Our brains, like our bodies, want to move towards healing. So I'm going to bring up that emotional splinter metaphor that I mentioned. If we ever, any of us had a splinter, right? It kind of got stuck in our finger. And until that splinter came out, then our finger started to heal itself. Similarly, if we have like an emotional splinter, something happens, then we need to take that out, or what we call reprocess it, kind of coming back to neuroplasticity, we'll talk about in a moment, to help us go towards healing. So to further underline how this mechanism, how this works, let's just talk about what normal memory looks like. Okay, all right. So maybe some of you guys went through an experience that was overwhelming. It was stressful. Maybe, it took you some days, weeks, or even months. You talked about it with friends. You talked about it with family. You maybe even dreamt about it. But all of a sudden, after some time, you started to feel better about it. And maybe somebody asked you, hey, how are you doing with such and such? And you go, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I'm okay, right? Maybe you learned from it. You made meaning out of it. Or you maybe were thinking, oh, okay, that doesn't define me. I'm okay now. I can get through it. So that's how we're supposed to respond to events. But somehow down the line, depending on how our nervous system, our brains encode the event, this system malfunctions. In that, the event that occurred is now maladaptively stored and encoded, is digested improperly. It's now kind of frozen in time, in the sense that every time we think about it, we immediately get this, oh shoot, like, I hate myself, I'm such a bad person, or I'm unworthy, I'm incompetent. And then you feel this immense sense of anxiety and disgust or shame, disappointment. And maybe you feel it permeating throughout your body. There's a body sensation component, a tightness in the chest, maybe tension in your shoulders. And so that any time you get reminded of this, you are now kind of reliving that experience, or you just have the same negative belief or the same emotions or body sensations happening again. So what happens with EMDR therapy, through the bilateral stimulation, could be eye movements or the tapping that we're going to teach you guys in a moment, helps connect with, hey, wait a minute, I am successful. I am worthy of love and belonging. I am a good person. What happened was just a mistake. I can forgive myself. I can forgive other people. And so what happens is it moves through an adaptive resolution, and you no longer have to feel that way negatively about yourself. Because again, there's one thing of knowing I'm a good person, but it's about, I actually feel like I'm a good person. And that's what EMDR therapy, that's why I'm in love with this kind of treatment, does. And then one more thing to add specifically in terms of, there was a study done in the Netherlands, and they found that doing research with EMDR and acquired brain injury, that there were certain things that survivors had to go through, they had more difficulty applying certain coping strategies, and they had difficulty suppressing what they could before. So again, going back to that regulation. So maybe before, this thing wouldn't piss you off as bad or give you so much anxiety. But because, again, the brain, that's the solution that helps to fix the problem, is the thing with the problem, you're having more difficulty with that. So in terms of when you begin treatment, we're going to make sure that we have those additional components to assist so that it can still work the way it's supposed to. All right, so let's go ahead and take a nice deep breath and move on to the next slide.
I would like to know if there's a bus to go there.
Oh, you mean transportation?
Yeah.
That's a very good question, Rafael. I think I would have to find out more information.
Mm-hmm.
Would you need transportation?
Because I don't want nobody bringing me there. Only pick up me and the bus to go there.
Can you please stop that? We'll find that out with Daniel, okay?
Hey, yeah, Raphael, I got you transportation. We'll kind of figure out. And so I heard Anita talking, and yeah, we'll connect bases afterward. Patricia?
Okay, thank you, Raphael. Good question. I wrote down that, so we'll make sure we can answer that for you. So I don't know how everybody's doing, but if we can just take a moment to do some box breathing, you can move on to the next picture too, and we'll breathe some more. I don't know if anybody's seen that cat.
My cat.
That's Daniel's cat.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys, if we can all just for a moment, just get comfortable for just a second and do some nice deep breath. Inhale for a count of 3. And hold for a moment, count of 3. Slowly exhale. And hold. Good. Again, inhale. Hold. Exhale slowly. Good. Couple more, guys. Deep breath, inhale. Hold and slowly exhale. Okay, guys. So let's go ahead and switch gears. Daniel's going to go into more depths about the connection with EMDR therapy in the brain, and then we'll continue.
Well, great. Thank you.
I have one question real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Christian. Yeah, of course.
Is it Patricia? So basically, from what you're saying, basically, for our brain to start repairing itself, we gotta remove that one splinter, right? The source splinter, correct?
You got it, Mr. Christian. That's exactly what we're talking about here. We're going to work through that splinter that's getting in the way. Yep.
Okay, I wanted to re-emphasize that because I believe that, and this is awesome stuff.
Awesome, Mr. Christian. Great. Thank you. Good question.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, just really briefly, and not to get too much into it, but the brain really is sectioned into 3 major sections. So neocortex, which is your logical brain. So non-human primates don't have this as much developed as we do. The limbic brain, which is the emotional neural system. And then the reptilian brain, which is like your automatic, so like your breathing, your heart rate, and all that. To remember this, we have a hand model. This is by Dan Siegel. He's an interpersonal neurobiologist. And so the hand model is, we've been talking about this before, right? So your wrist is the reptilian brain. That's your brain stem. If you take your thumb and you bend it over your palm, that is your limbic system, right? It's this thumb here. And if you take your 4 fingers and then wrap it over your thumb, that is your neocortex or your thinking brain, right? And so what they're in your middle, the fingernail of your middle finger, that is of your thinking brain. That is what controls your emotions, right? It's called the medial prefrontal cortex, right? And so why that's a problem is, you know, in head injury or brain injury, after impact and it rotates in around in your skull, what's really the fingerprint of traumatic brain injury is called prefrontal lobe damage, right? So that's because your skull is pretty smooth. but the front of your brain is pretty bony. It's got your eye bones, your nose bones, all that stuff. So when it impacts, most of it is pretty smooth, but the front. And so as a result, the fingerprints or the characteristic injury of TBI is frontal lobe damage. And how this manifests for us is problems with attention, problems with concentration, problems with short-term memory, frustration tolerance, right? Because if the medial prefrontal cortex is supposed to be controlling our emotions, then that's why we typically get amygdala hijack or Amy, right? At the high emotion, right? So thinking back to that SPEC scan in the very beginning, where there was really, really high emotional energy. And so what EMDR is doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patricia, is it helps your brain expend emotional energy more efficiently.
Correct.
Right. Great. So if we need to be as efficient as possible, because as we see here, but the different strands that kind of look like spaghetti, colored spaghetti, those are basically individual information highways in your brain. You might have somewhere in your police or like medical reports, you might have a term called diffuse axonal injury, which is just a really, really fancy way of saying that your brain does not talk to itself very good, right? And so we see here in the control, like right there, especially right there in the center, that connects your left and right hemispheres. But in head injury or brain injury, that gets disrupted. So typically you get a thought and a behavior, right? So you have a thought and then you actually initiate your behavior, right? I want to clean, so I'm going to get up and clean, right? But in head injury, you want to clean, you have a thought and a behavior, I want to clean, but then that middle pathway is gone. But according to neuroplasticity, as we were talking about, you may not go straight to A to B, but you can go from A to C to D to LMNOP, W, X, Y, Z, then back down to B. So you get there, right? But then, and so this is what happens for me, right? You go from A to C to D, LMNO up, got lost up, A to C up, got distracted, then I start again, A to C and D, and I get lost again and again and again. And finally I go X, Y, Z, then back down to B, right? Right. So same as having that same experience. I get you completely.
So yes, man, this is so incredible. So due to our trauma, whatever it may be, there's a disruption in communication between the hemispheres.
Fantastic. That's exactly right, Mr. Christian. And so how this is great because you're getting there, right? You're getting to A to B. Only problem is it took me 4 hours to get there. Now, my family members, my friends is all upset because the thing that they told me to do in the morning, I'm not getting done till like the sun's going down. And so, and either way you put it, you are burning more mental gas by doing this thing here on the right than here on the left. And how does that manifest? As who's had this experience? As cognitive fatigue. Like 2 p.m., 3 p.m., I am done. I watch a 30-minute television show, I am done, right? And so that's why we're saying like, and so we've taken a look at how we can burn energy more efficiently. And so pending data from us, right? So this is data from our cognitive rehabilitation class, right? So it's 12 weeks or 3 months, and we tracked everyone, right? So there were 49 of us other survivors that went into this. And so when we assessed the progression of anxiety and the relationship between the progression in cognitive symptoms like short-term memory loss, attention, concentration, forgetting appointments, that kind of thing, we saw that when it came to anxiety, that was not related to the progression in cognitive deficits. What about depression? And we saw that same thing. It really wasn't anxiety or depression. And so we feel this, right? It's like, so for those of you who said, I've had depression before my head injury, depression with a head injury is not the same as depression without one. Those are two different things. We feel this, we know this, right? I see Nancy's not there, right? We know this, but it was only until last year that Siddiqui and colleagues, right, found this study. And so they are a neurophysiological research team out of Boston, Harvard. So they did one study one, and they found this result, and then they redid it again in study two, and then replicated the results of study one, which found that when it came to individuals who are non-depressed versus depressed, this is on the right. This is basically like energy that your brain, the energy that your brain expends at rest. So while it's at rest, these two things are the same, right? So they wanted to reset those so we had a control group. But then when you have a non-depressed person or a depressed person without head injury, their energy at rest, their neural energy at rest tanks, right? So I don't want to do anything. Nothing makes me happy. But then we looked at that, and when depression with a head injury, you actually get a slight increase in energy expended at rest. So there was a dissociation between those two things here, right? In what they called TBI affective syndrome. Now, of course, this things move slow at getting on before it's widely spread. So this just came out like last year. So, you know, we're taking movements, we're taking steps, right? And so we are taking steps, and I'll keep you all updated on how things progress. Then we took a look at, well, what about stress? And here, this was the thing that was related to your cognitive symptoms, was stress and the inability to really manage this stress. And really what freaks me out, and I get anxious, and then from there I get stressed out, and then once I get stressed out, then that's what goes to my anxiety, or that's what goes to my depression, because I'm too embarrassed or ashamed because I keep forgetting stuff. And so because of that, I isolate, and it was because of that started with stress. And so as we've talked about, this whole idea of now, if these are things that we're having issues with, what can we do about it, right? And so we have here a video to discuss what we've been talking about a lot, neuroplasticity.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
All right, guys. So, yes, neuroplasticity, you can all rewire your brains. And I'm going to give you guys an example of EMDR therapy and that very concept, neuroplasticity, or what we call reprocessing. That's an EMDR term because your brain has already processed event or a stressor. But what we're going to do is we're going to reprocess it, we're going to rewire it. So, if you guys can see in this example, I chose this example because sometimes I've heard that it might be a common and a difficulty, perhaps something happening at work or work-related issue. And what you and your clinician, your EMDR clinician will be doing, let's just say if we, for example, we were going to target an incident at work, is that you might find that every time you think about work, that you might believe about yourself, that you feel maybe you're incompetent or unworthy, you feel anxious, you get tense, right? And so with the bilateral stimulation here, or the eye movements here, we're going to see if your brain can be able to spontaneously make those connections to remembering other times that perhaps you were able to get through something difficult. And so I think Daniel was talking to me about how he asked you guys a lot, what were the successes of the week, right? Sometimes we forget what kind of maybe minor successes that we have. And so sometimes it's important to remember that. And actually that's what's the change. That's how we're going to rewire our brains in terms of neuroplasticity and making that change in the neural pathway, is to connect the traumatic incident or that incident, the stressor, through bilateral stimulation with, hey, wait a minute, I got through something difficult before. That didn't define me. This isn't going to define me either. It connects through the eye movements or bilateral stimulation, the tapping. And then from there, you get to adaptive resolution, where the image on the right, you get a happy face. You believe, I am competent. I can get through this. And your body is relaxed. That's the change here, guys. Again, what makes this different than perhaps maybe like a cognitive behavioral type of treatment or a kind of more of a behavioral approach, is that we incorporate the body to ensure that your belief, your thought process matches how you feel internally. And so, just in case, in terms of modifications with us survivors, we might just need to help enhance and strengthen the resilience that you already have, meaning strengthen the times when you did believe that you were competent or successful and confident. We just might need to strengthen that a little bit more to highlight those neural pathways so that when we are beginning reprocessing, it can connect. Okay, go ahead and move to the next slide. So all in all, in summary, EMDR therapy can help us with stress reduction. As what Daniel was talking about, it wasn't depression, it wasn't anxiety, it was stress, right? So that's really important for us to make sure we do that. And we're going to actually do an exercise if we have time, depending on questions today. And then enhancing resilience, strengthening the times that make you believe about yourself that you are competent, confident, worthy, capable. We're going to work on issues related to events with the TBI. And then if there are any pre-existing, issues that happened prior to TBI, you can work on that too. Okay. All right. So this is an exercise. And Daniel, what do you think? Should we go through this, or should we do questions? What would be most helpful? What do you guys want to do?
I think at this point, maybe go
Questions?
through the instructions of the exercise so that people can at least get the instructions of how to do it.
Okay.
And then we'll head to questions. So in about 3 minutes. So yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, great, guys. So this is a stress reduction technique that we call calm, safe place. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to have you guys imagine a calm, peaceful, and or safe place. And with that, once you bring up this place, I'm going to teach you your very own bilateral stimulation called the butterfly hug. This is kind of an ancient way of that they've used to deregulate your nervous system. So anytime you feel stressed or angry or upset, what you can do, if you can grab your hands, go ahead and cross them over if you're capable or able to at this moment. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be alternating taps very slowly. It's like tap, tap, tap. And if you feel comfortable to do so, go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you guys to bring up a place that helps you feel calm and relaxed. Some people like to think of the beach, the river, the mountains. I want you to notice what you see, the images, the colors, and the sounds. And just notice how this place helps you feel calm, relaxed, maybe even safe. Noticing how your breath on its own gets deeper and begins to slow down.
Great. Excellent. So as we're kind of keeping this, that is basically a kind of way that we can introduce bilateral stimulation. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So and so we would like to close this, or like to close the presentation with a quote with Friedrich Nietzsche, who we opened with earlier. He is a famous German philosopher, and so he said, "To live is to suffer, to survive and to be survivors is to find meaning in that suffering." Right? And so we as survivors of brain injury, we are looking for, meaning, right? And so in that, this what this platform is, that's what this family is, that's what we're all about, is finding that meaning in that suffering. And so as we all progress toward recovery and rehabilitation together. And so thank you very much for your time. And so Patricia, and so before we end, I'd like to open up the floor for questions for Patricia.
Thank you guys. I appreciate the time. I'm just so humbled to be able to have this opportunity. You guys are the real heroes here. I can't say myself that if I had to go through something difficult that I could get through this. So I just want to say good job for all of you.